Today we're going to talk about Google leading the fight against the First Amendment. And I've had many people push back on this and say they're a private company. They can't be fighting back against the First Amendment. That's government that can censor. They can do whatever they want to as a private company. And yes, they can. But what we're going to show you in this news broadcast is how they have a private-public partnership for government control, for government censorship. And it's not just InfoWars. We told you it's going to start with InfoWars. It's going to go to other news sites, but it goes to your comments as well on any website that you go to. Here's an example. Kit Daniels' story today. Google RoboTool flags conservative comments as toxic. This is a program called Perspective API, a machine learning model developed by Google. It's used by a lot of major corporations. They say, however, what it does is it scores comments as being toxic or not toxic, and it gives them a weight, a percentage weight as to how toxic these comments are. And as you can see from these screenshots here, something like a statement that says global warming is fake, the AI says, well, that's 39% toxic. Global warming is real, that's only 2% toxic. Okay, then you have a bias towards Hillary Clinton from Trump. Trump is looked at as 23% toxic, whereas Hillary Clinton was only 6% toxic. The idea that abortion is murder, oh, that's 62% toxic, whereas abortion is not murder is only 46%. Who's using this? Well, establishment news outlets like The Guardian, The New York Times, The Economist. How do they use it? They want to keep their comments section there so that you participate. Nevertheless, they want to weight these comments, get rid of the ones that they don't like, and it has a very clear political perspective. Now, when these companies work together to suppress a political view, when they have economic benefits that are going to accrue to them when they work with the government, you understand, this is a public-private partnership to censor your speech. It is directed as political speech, and that's what we see happening all over the place. Of course, a good example of this is that this is not anything new. This is something, we had this bombshell screenshots that were sent to us about a specific program. Mike Cernovich sent this to us. I will get to that article in just a moment. But as Jamie White points out on InfoWars, this is nothing new. This has been going around for a very long time. While we're just now seeing these revelations about Google specifically targeting us, using us as an example, using a particular story, we're going to talk about the details of that story. He says this is something, as we've been pointing out to you, that as they're setting up their so-called fact-checking and setting themselves up as the arbiters of truth, saying that they have no bias, see, that's fundamentally dishonest. When you go to Google, when you go to Facebook, you don't expect your content to be censored. And I have to say as well that when we look at most of the people who are pushing back against this idea that something is wrong here, they say, you know, this is a private company, they can do what they want, but they don't support that when it comes to a bakery refusing to bake a cake for a gay wedding if the bakers are Christian. Who has more influence, a local bakery or somebody like Google, who essentially has a monopoly on internet searches? You have to understand that the argument that was made to shut down these bakeries was to say, well, these people have an open public business and they're not allowed to discriminate. They won't use that same standard against Google, will they? Because the government wants them to discriminate against political views. And as they're pointing out here, even though differing conclusions may be presented, we think it is still helpful for people to understand the degree of consensus around a particular claim and have clear information when the sources agree. That was a Google research scientist, Kong Yu. They just need to drop off that G. It's really about conning you. That's what they're really doing. They're saying, well, we're presenting this information and it's being filtered by what's popular, what people are talking about. No, it's being filtered by the political agenda of the people who are running that, the people who are making multiple visits to the White House, speaking with them like Eric Schmidt. They said, depending on who was on the shift, things would be blacklisted that were trending. A former Facebook news curator told Gizmodo, he says, I'd come on shift, I'd discover that CPAC or Romney or Glenn Beck or popular conservative topics wouldn't be trending because either the curator didn't recognize the news topic or they had a bias against Ted Cruz, for example. And he says, I think it had a chilling effect on conservative news. That's precisely what it was designed to do. If you think this is a problem, you should also be worried about their concentration of power that they have not only over the information, but Google is also setting up a concentration of power over your transportation. That is another public-private partnership that is being worked hand in glove with a few privileged corporations and the government. The government wants to control, wants to tax and track everywhere you want to go. And of course, the corporations want to make money. And so they know that they can get their monopolies from the government if they play ball. Now, this is what happened over the weekend. As we pointed out, we've talked about this on the radio show extensively today. Mike Cernovich was sent some information that Google was taking out a major contract to delist InfoWars from its search index. So this is very specific. This is very detailed, what they're doing to InfoWars. We've got screenshots here. They're saying things like, you should be mindful of where an article comes from. Again, establishing some places as always truthful, others as never truthful. They're going to vote them up as low or high confidence level on the search engines. And the example that they gave, I think, is very interesting. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, this comment here. Important. Negative reputation is sufficient reason to give a page a low-quality rating. Where do they get the negative reputation? Oh, well, that comes from Google, doesn't it? So they tell you whether it's true or not. They tell you whether the place has a negative reputation. A good example of this is the article that they have about Assad saying this is a fake attack. They say, here's an article from CNN, and here's an article from InfoWars. Now, the article from CNN is good because it quotes government sources. But the article from InfoWars is not good because it doesn't just parrot government sources. It also looks to see what Assad is saying. It looks to see what Ron Paul is saying. Oh, so we must be going, as I say, against the grain, to say the least. You have to understand, if you think this is simply about their freedom to suppress certain information for a political agenda, you have to go back and understand Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird was put together by the CIA. They controlled the news media decades ago to make sure that they control the narrative that you heard. They picked the stories. They picked the narratives about the stories that were going to go out. They worked with those that were at the top who could decide which stories were going to be spiked at CBS, NBC, ABC, and which ones were going to come through. And then what they were going to tell you about those stories. That is precisely what they're trying to replicate with Google, with Facebook. Now, if we look at this article, again, this came out on Friday, the one about Assad. That was Don Salazar's article, U.S. fabricated chemical weapons attack. The videos could be staged. And again, when we reported this, I said at the time, I think that he jumped the shark by saying that nobody died. Clearly, I think people died there, but I think it's interesting, don't you, that they showed the people dying in great detail. Do we see the people dying on the streets as the Islamic terrorists mow them down with the trucks? No, we don't see them slowly dying on camera. If we see any pictures at all, they're blurred out. But these pictures were focused on, and they took immediate action. When you see something like that, when you see it being done by somebody who has no motive, then you should start to question that official government narrative. And now we have, and this came out over the weekend, International Business Time, we have RT, we have Press TV, we have InfoWars covering what an MIT expert, a weapons expert who used to work for the Department of Defense, an MIT professor, is saying this is a fake attack. Are you seeing this anywhere in the mainstream media? No. Are you seeing it trending on Google? No. You will not see it trending there. Now, this individual is Theodore Apostle of MIT. He has worked in the past for the Department of Defense as a scientific advisor. And he focuses on the narrative of this shell. We were told, no, it couldn't have been the Russians bombing a chemical plant and then a cloud going over and taking out these people. No, we saw a crater in the middle of the street. So he says, let's take a look at this picture of this crater in the middle of the street. And here's this picture. He says, if you look at the shell, you see that it was not dropped from an airplane. The damage on the casing is inconsistent from an aerial explosion. It was also not an explosion that went from the inside out. He says it's more likely there was an explosive charge was laid upon the shell that contained gas before being detonated. He said the explosive acted on the pipe as a blunt, crushing mallet. And you can see that in that picture. He said it drove the pipe into the ground while at the same time creating the crater. He said there was no competent analyst would miss the fact that the alleged sarin canister was forcefully crushed from above rather than exploded by munitions within. You understand that? You can look at that picture, the very picture that they say shows that this was something that was dropped by the airplane. He said, no, it wasn't dropped by the airplane. It was crushed on the ground. It did not blow from the inside out. It was crushed to detonated. He says all of these highly amateurish mistakes indicate that this White House report like the earlier Obama White House report from 2013, was not properly vetted by the intelligence community as they claimed. I have worked, he said, with the intelligence community in the past. I have grave concerns about the politicization of intelligence that seems to be occurring with more frequency in recent times. Now, this is a man who worked as a scientific advisor on the same case in 2013. We've seen this movie before. And he pointed out at that time that Assad was not responsible. The evidence did not suggest that. And that was also verified by the UN at a later date. If we could have taken time to do an investigation, that's what we would have found out. Now, I said before that it is a public-private partnership. What Google gets out of this is money. And when we look at the competition that's going on, this story from Jerome Corsi points out that Soros and Google have been funding net neutrality groups to try to control the internet and to censor Infowars.com. Part of what's behind this move that has been going on between the FCC, whether or not information would be allowed to be sold by ISPs that they're collecting on you, that was spun as an attack on your privacy by the Trump administration. I would prefer that you have control over your own information. I don't want to see people collecting information and merchandising it on me. But of course, that's going on by Google and Facebook. They don't want the competition from the ISPs. That's what's going on here, as well as a competition between different government bureaucracies, between the FCC and between the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. Then there's another one, the FEC, the Election Commission. And that former chairwoman is now calling for regulation of political speech, very direct as to what she's looking for. She wants to shut down political speech. She wants to regulate it, say that if you have a political opinion about something and you talk about that during the election, that should be considered to be a contribution to somebody. So they want to shut it down on that basis. All of this is pushing us along as we see the attacks in Syria, the buildup in North Korea. All of that is pushing us away from what is really happening here in America domestically, the things that we should really be focused on. When we look at tax day this last weekend, what did we see? We saw leftist groups saying they wanted to see Donald Trump's tax returns. Well, some of us want to see his tax reforms, the things that he ran on, the things that should be changed. And we should think about this as this is the income tax weekend, as some people did. Some people protested in front of the Trump Tower saying, we want to see tax reform. I don't really care about his returns. Do you really care about his returns, or do you care about how much taxes you're paying? See, the issue is that the socialists want to push an agenda of envy. That's the way that they can control you. They don't want you to think about how much taxes you're paying. So some people got in front of the Trump Tower. Another group pointed out that over 104 years, we have seen a dramatic change in the income tax. And we need to think about this as we look at Obamacare. Obamacare started out pretty strong. We saw massive increases in premiums as Obamacare came online, but we didn't see that with the income tax. If you go back 104 years ago, in 1913, they created the Federal Reserve. They created the income tax. They changed our tax system so that the taxes became internal instead of at the border as they previously had been. That was the bias prior to that. Then they made it about taxing Americans, completely inverting everything that Thomas Jefferson was proud of accomplishing in his first administration. He bragged, what internal, what labor, what mechanic knows the tax man? Nobody. We fund the government, and it was a constitutionally sized government. We fund it on import taxes. But in 1913, the bankers got control, and they created the income tax. At first, it was only the very, very wealthy. The top bracket was 7%. Now it's almost 40%. The marginal income tax at that time was 1 to 7%. Now it's 10 to 40%. There were 400 pages of tax code. Today, there are 74,608 pages. And here's the key. In 1913, if you adjust it for inflation, you would get a standard deduction for your family of $98,000. Now you get just over $12,000. And only 358,000 people paid it. That's how these programs grow. And 104 years ago, that's when that began. 81 years ago, under FDR, we had something called the Export-Import Bank. And back in 2015, it was not reauthorized. Why? Because we had a couple of vacancies on that board, and the Senate refused to fill them, so they didn't have a quorum. They couldn't meet. What is it that the Export-Import Bank does? Well, they give money to big corporations like Boeing and GE. And as Reason Magazine pointed out, contrary to lobbyist talking points, The XM Bank is firmly in the business of big business. On the domestic side, 40% of its activities benefit only one company, Boeing. They're very happy that Donald Trump has now said he's going to revive the Export-Import Bank. Over 60% of the bank's financing aids only 10 giant companies like Caterpillar, Bechtel, and General Electric, who pays no taxes. On the foreign side, however, your taxes go to subsidize cheap loans for, in many cases, state-owned corporations like Pemex, the Mexican government's oil and gas giant, or Air Emirates, the airline of the wealthy country, the United Arab Emirates. Do you really want to be taxed to pay for foreign-owned companies? That's what we need to look at. That's the distraction that these military adventures are taking us away from. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is one of the biggest secrets out there. The missing link of why our ancestors, whether you were in Africa or ancient Albion, which is England today, why our ancestors were so much stronger. I mean, there are huge archaeological reports, all sorts of anthropology studies, you can look them up for yourself, that show that humans, just an average farmer of 10,000 years ago in England, was stronger than Olympic athletes today. In the final equation, everyone knows our modern society has lost its vitality. The sperm counts are down like 90%. People are falling apart. They're totally depressed. They're unhappy. What is going on? Every ancient culture was obsessed with what I'm about to reveal to you. Today we call it bone broth, and for thousands of years our ancestors enjoyed its benefits before it became lost to our modern diets of processed junk. That's why I'm so excited to announce the product that is undoubtedly the jewel in the crown of InfoWars Life products. Caveman. We lost our vitality because we just ignored the ancient traditions. Everyone knew that you used all the parts of the animal. You used the skin to cover yourself or for shelter. You used the meat for sustenance, the fat for cooking, but you used the bones for strength. We are now introducing Caveman by InfoWarsLife.com, the ultimate in true paleo nutrition with bone broth, turmeric root, chaga mushroom, and 7 total primal superfoods in a single great tasting formula. The bone is so amazing. From the outside structure full of minerals and key cofactors to the marrow that produces the blood for the body. This is the engine of the life essence. I've made a lot of important points here, but this is the one you need to research for yourself because it's so key. High-quality bone broth helps support healthy muscles and connective tissue, while the active compounds in turmeric do battle on the cellular level and help fight free radicals. And collagen is essential to aid healthy tendons, ligaments, and muscle tissue. This is an absolute win-win. You get an amazing product produced right here in America. You support InfoWars and all we're doing to promote freedom and the restoration of our republic and promotion of freedom worldwide. The journey towards better health and giving our bodies these amazing compounds that God created starts at InfoWarsLife.com. 3 years in the making, incredible research, and the very best ingredients. I'm Alex Jones, and I may not be a caveman, but compared to these trendies out there in the street, I'm as close as it gets. Join me at InfoWarsLife.com and get your caveman formula today.